Hey friends, welcome back to Shift Happens. My name is Joe Smith. I'm your host and the lead pastor of an open and affirming church here in Gainesville, Florida. And with me today, I have Monica Chadwick. Monica is a friend of mine that I met, oh my gosh, I don't know how many years ago it was. I was a pastor at another church here in town, but very conservative, very evangelical, and Monica was a college student at one of the Bible colleges here and would come up, and I think you even helped with worship a time or two. Um, yeah, over there. But thank you for coming on and sharing your story with us. It's good to see you.
Yeah, yeah, it's been definitely interesting for sure. And the college actually is closing in June.
I saw that.
So that was a very interesting thing to read. But just the sister college, not the college that it's now affiliated with, because
Right.
they joined with the one in Tennessee. So it's definitely a weird thing to see that as well.
Yeah. For those that don't know, we're talking about Florida Christian College, and it was almost like another campus, like a satellite campus of Johnson Christian University, I think is what it's called now in Tennessee.
Johnson University. I don't know if
University.
it
Yeah.
changed names. When I
Yeah.
graduated, it was Johnson University.
Okay. Yeah. But it is a another Bible college. So one of a handful that are closing. So
Mhm.
bye. Anyway, um, yeah. So Monica, tell us about your story. Where did you grow up? Obviously, there was some church involved because you went to a Bible college. So
Yes.
why don't you, yeah, what was life like as little Monica?
So I grew up in Archer, Florida. So I always say Gainesville because no one ever really knows Archer because it's like so tiny. So you always just say like, Gainesville.
Yeah.
And um so there was like one church near our house that we could actually walk to. It was like right across from us. It was a Methodist church. And if you don't know, like if you've never been to a Methodist church, it's like a little more, I would say, traditional, I guess. They have
Hmm.
like their routines and they're very like um I don't know,
Liturgical.
almost like, yeah, I would say ritualistic, but no,
Yeah.
that's not the word because they're
Yeah.
Christians. They don't want to use the word,
Yeah. Liturgy.
right?
Yeah. That's very
um
true.
and so we grew up sort of going to that church, but so I was a tomboy growing up. I always enjoyed shorts and overalls, and I didn't really care for like dresses and stuff like that because I liked to like run around and play a lot, which I think maybe is like normal for little kids, but I definitely was drawn more towards like a masculine side in that, but I also enjoyed things like makeup and things like that. So I always had this sort of weird, I would say like balance between wanting to do things that were more on the boy side and then more on like the feminine side of things. But there was kind of like this unspoken thing growing up that I think, especially in the 90s, you knew like you weren't supposed to ask questions about if you're a girl liking girls or a guy liking guys. Like you just weren't supposed to talk about it, growing up in the 90s. And so it was kind of just this unspoken rule that like I wasn't supposed to do that and like I wasn't supposed to ask questions. So a lot of things I kind of went through on my own,
Hmm.
and I kind of kept everything to myself. I'd never really asked questions, especially to my parents because they did have that like very set mindset as far as Christians. And I should also mention that because my dad is Latin, he's Puerto Rican. My grandmother was Roman Catholic. So there it was a very interesting upbringing. And I think as a white person in America growing up, my upbringing was quite weird. Because even though I was white, my home acted a lot like a Latin home
Hmm.
instead of a white home. And we also grew up in a poor part of town, so there was that. So it was a very weird way of growing up, and you weren't supposed to talk about anything that deviated from what was considered normal. And so there wasn't a word like pansexual wasn't a word, demisexual, like none of that was a thing. Like because you weren't supposed to talk about it. Like there was nothing to really describe that. And so I would see these just like movies, and I would be like, oh, all of these people are attractive to me, not just like the lead guy, not just like the lead girl, like everyone. I would be like, why is this like a thing? And so friendships were really hard for me growing up, and I never really held like a lot of them. And so my dad constantly would be like, oh, where's this friend? And I'd be like, what am I supposed to say? This friendship got really weird because I felt closer, or like, we kind of did things a little like farther than friendship, and we kind of had to like stop.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't say that to him because, especially with what my parents believed growing up, there's always a fear of being kicked out of the house. And so for my own safety, there was a lot of like, having to keep that to myself. Um, so just in growing up, everything that I went through, I never talked about.
Mm-hmm.
But then in high school, I did come to know God, and I came into the church. And so all of those thoughts sort of, I was like, all right, well, I'm not supposed to do these things in the church either. So I did what I learned to do growing up with my emotions and just pushed it way deep down and tried to forget that it existed and just didn't think about
I know. And isn't
it.
that just so healthy and such a good way to cope with stuff? I mean, that's sarcasm for people who don't know me. That's definitely sarcasm. But you know what? You're not wrong. And I know that we've talked about it here a few times how there's just these shared experiences that people have, from I mean, I've talked to people up in Washington State and New York and Arizona, California, Florida, and it's literally all over the country, and even a few people in different countries, and they all have some of these shared experiences, and that's one of them, especially if they grew up in like, very religious or very traditional spaces where you just learn to suppress, you learn to lie to yourself, you learn to lie to other people, and it just becomes second nature until either there's some sort of an explosion that takes place internally, or people kind of move away, like physically move, and then their body's like, oh hey, now we can deal with this. So it's interesting how I've said it before, I'll say it again, the whole system sets up people for that. I mean, it just produces that in
Yeah.
people.
Hmm. Oh yeah, it definitely does that. And especially even as like a society, I think there's still, even though there's a lot more acceptance, there's like still a lot,
Mhm.
even we can see with the laws pushing back on it,
I
there's still
do.
this desire for like one thing.
Yep.
I mean, a lot, if you read about, a lot of it has to do with like survival, because that's how we survived like at the beginning of humanity, is by following one path.
Hmm.
It's unfortunate, but that's what happens. And now that we're more advanced, you would hope that people would try to grow and change, but you can't force that on anyone, unfortunately.
That's true. So you're was it, did you say high school? That's when you started going to church and like really going into church? Is it high school age?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, it was around like my junior year of high school, I would
Okay.
say. I went and so this when I actually started going to Harvest,
Hmm.
and so I met Brian, and I started going because I started dating this guy who went to the church, and they invited me. And Jesse was like a good friend of mine. He was really silly, and my parents wouldn't take me that far because like from Archer to Harvest was like a really long way, and they were like, no, we're not going to drive you. And so
Yeah.
he was like, I'll take you. Like I don't mind driving. And so I found this group of people who was just really like willing, like even a group of kids that was like just super willing to be like friends with me, especially like being the weird girl. Like I'm still the weird girl,
Yeah.
it was really great. And then just seeing that people actually believed in that thing, I was like, oh, okay, so this is not something that they just do for a front, because at home it was always this thing that, okay, they outwardly that's what they portray, but at home
Hmm.
things reflected differently. Behind closed doors things were different. And so like, people would be like, oh, you say these things but your parents seem so great, and I'm like, when they don't see what happens when we're like alone with them. And so it was like really eye-opening to see people who actually believed
Hmm.
and what they said they did.
Yeah.
And then so that's when I started to kind of fall into it more. And I still like, I really was attracted to this idea that there is this God that loved us no matter what. And I think that that's something that I still hold on to, even though my spirituality has changed quite a lot since
Yeah.
then. I still believe that, God is the God that I learned about and that I know from the Bible is the God of love. And so um that is initially why I had started going, and why I decided to go down the path of going to Bible college. And so I went for music. I majored in music and worship. Um, and so, you know, you're we that college was a little different because it's like it was a lot smaller, I would
Hmm.
say, than a lot of other ones like Milligan, and all of that, where there's huge dorms. We had apartments where it had like one bathroom and two
Mm.
bedrooms and then a kitchen and a living space.
Okay.
So we didn't have like a cafeteria or anything. We cooked everything on our own because we had a kitchen, and then there were two girls to each room. And so there were only two bedrooms, so that's four of us in a room. So it was always kind of weird because you would get really close to them, but I would, and I didn't really know how to separate friendships from relationships because at that time I didn't deal with what I should have dealt with. I pushed everything down. So to me, I didn't really know what to feel or how to feel or like what I was feeling. To me,
Hmm.
like relationships and friendships were pretty much the same thing. And so I kind of treated everyone the same. Even like guys that I dated, it was like everyone was treated the same.
And I imagine
And
that,
so
yeah, I imagine that even in high school, like once you start getting into the church stuff, junior, senior year, and then you go to Bible college, not only not having not been able to practice, differentiating those two things, but then, like you said, the suppressing of everything, but then you add on that added layer of this is an abomination to use church language, right? I
mhm.
absolutely do not agree with that, but to use typical church language, to add that on top of everything, I'm sure that there was a lot of internal confusion and I don't even know, just I don't turmoil that I don't know.
Yeah, I it was definitely weird. Because people would be like, "Oh, you guys seem so close," and like people always comment on those things. And I was like, "Oh, am I not supposed to be this close to my friends?" And so I would kind of keep everyone at arm's length because I was like
Mm,
scared of what others would think, and I didn't want anyone to think about that way because I didn't know how to separate everything
yeah.
the way that I should have, you know. And
Now,
then Bible college is where I met my husband too. So
now, I have a quick question. Did your inability to kind of separate friendships from relationships, like a romantic relationship, did that push people away? Were people like, "Ooh, you're too close. Let's not do this."
no, actually, I would say that a lot of people, so I had a lot of friends, a lot of the comments that I heard, even behind my back, like people would say, like, oh, Monica, like I had someone who said, like, oh, before I joined your small group, because we had to do like these
Hmm.
study groups each week. And so I got to the point where I had to lead one. And she's like, I asked people before I joined like your thing about you, and everyone said that you were really nice, but you were quiet. So that was always like the
Mm,
consensus that I heard about myself, was like people thought that I was really nice, but I was quiet. Except for people on the cross country team, because so I ran cross country as well. It was like a really good way for me to interact and have friends, but it's like that thing with kids where they play around each other, but they don't
mm,
necessarily talk or interact with each other. So that
right.
was a good sport for me because I could do that.
Yeah, yeah,
with my peers, you know.
yeah.
But and I so that made it easier for me to talk to them and to kind of interact with them because I didn't have to be so like face to face.
Hmm.
And so as far as they knew, I was a lot more outgoing, but to everyone else in the college, I was just, quiet
Yeah.
person. And they were like, "Oh, I thought that you hated me at first because like you look really intimidating, but you're really, really nice." And so that was always like the thing. And I still, even now, it's because I just have my face just like makes me look really mean. But um,
No, I feel that. I
no
have
one
to.
really.
No, I get it. I have to watch my facial expressions because if I'm, there will be times where we're talking and I'm like really engaged in what you're saying. So I'm concentrating on what you're saying, but
Mhm.
not what my face is saying. And so I've had people
Right.
look at me and be like, "Are you okay? Are you upset with me?" And I'm like, "What are you talking
Yeah.
about? Like we're talking. What do?" Yeah. So I
Yeah.
feel that I have RBF big time. So
Yeah, me too. That's what my
yeah,
husband said. Like when we
yeah.
first started dating, he's like, "You just always look angry." And I have to do the eyebrow thing. I'm like, Are my
Uh-huh.
eyebrows okay, sir? What are you talking
Yes.
about?" Like I have to lift my eyebrows so no one thinks I'm mad.
Yes. I feel that. I really do. Yeah. It'll happen a lot. I know this has nothing to do with anything, but it'll happen a lot while I'm watching TV. Like if I'm watching TV, my wife will look
Mhm.
over and be like, "Is something wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Why? What are we talking about?" And she was like, "You just look like you're so pissed." And I'm like, "I'm just watching TV. I don't know."
I'm
But
just
anyway,
enjoying this.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, this is a great show. It's not angering me. I'm fine. Thank you. Yeah.
It's just my face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's
anyway,
why I
your
always say
small groups and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
my face.
Yeah. It's just my face. Yeah.
But actually it seems like a lot of people I I think a lot of people were drawn to me because I was generally kind, um, just because like of a personal preference, like I understand what it's like growing up the way that I did, and then obviously with my sexuality, knowing how it is to be treated differently, and so I didn't want to do that to other people,
Mm,
and so I think that really draws other people in, and so I think that that's what a lot of it was. So I had a lot of acquaintances and friends despite the fact that I didn't let anyone really get to know me,
yeah.
which is interesting, but I think it makes people comfortable because I did have one roommate that I got really, really close to, but she and I did have a falling out because and at one point she was like, "You just ask intense questions and I don't know how to answer them." Because to me, I always like surface level stuff is not interesting to me, and it's hard for me to connect with people when it's just like, "How is the weather? Has this that?" I'm like, "That doesn't matter. We can tell the weather. We have an app for it. Like you can go outside." Like for me, that's not something that I want to talk about. And but for a lot of people, it is very like they have a visceral reaction when you're like, "How is like your heart? Like how are you doing? What's going on in your life?" Even if you're really close to them, because a lot of people like they're not used to it. And so for her, especially what she was going through, which is why I would ask questions because I knew what she was going through. And for me, quality time is my love language, and I wanted to make sure that she knew she was like cared for and in a safe space. And so I would ask those questions because I didn't know, she's her home state was like far away.
Hmm.
And so I was like, she doesn't have any family here. Like, how is, I just want to make sure she's doing okay. But for her, that seemed, I guess, invasive almost, I guess would be the word.
Hmm.
Even though to me, it felt like a
Yeah.
normal question,
So you mentioned
hmm
that you met your husband at Bible college, and I'm interested in how that played out with you. I mean, listen, we're for those of us that went to Bible colleges, number one, it would be very weird if you left Bible college without being married, because
Right.
that's the norm, right? Like there's high pressure to do that. Um, but then if you add in any kind of queer sexuality in the middle of all of that, um,
hmm
and not being in a place to deal with it, to address it, to explore it, to like even admit it, right? So
hmm
I'm interested in how all of that took place.
Yeah, so I actually he was going there for counseling. He's counseling major, so we didn't have any classes together, but the previous semester he had dated one of my roommates, and she and I did not get along at all. I just thought that she was really mean, so I moved out into a different apartment with some different people. And then I guess they broke up. And the next one, he started talking to me. And I always tell him about this. I brought it up to one of my good friends. She's actually still really good friends with me. And I told her, she was one of the first people I told when I came out. And she was really great about it, even though she's still very evangelical Christian. She is still really close to me. And so
Mhm.
that was a really nice thing. For that to happen. And she was like, "Oh, that's kind of weird." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Why is this guy talking to me?" Because I had no interest in him at all whatsoever. I was like, I'm just gonna be single for like the rest of my life, whatever. I don't care. I don't need a relationship. I don't need this. Like, I'm happy by
Mhm.
myself. Like, relationships are great, but I don't need it. And so he continued to talk to me despite that. And so I
Persistent.
messaged him back. Yeah, he was, because the first time he asked me about being together, I was like, let's just get to know each other, because I didn't want to outright say no. And he asked again later, and I said yes. And so after that, we ended up getting engaged like 3 years later. Because I told him, like, after 4 years, it's just a waste of time, and I don't want to waste your time. So
Yeah. I'm surprised that you all dated that long before getting engaged, because there's intense pressure to get married
yeah,
because that's what you're supposed to do.
yeah, like that was the first time being in
Kudos
Bible
to
college
you.
I heard the phrase like ring by spring. Like I'd never heard that until I got there. And like Shark Week, I was like, this is weird.
It is
Like
weird.
I had never heard
All
that
of it's
until I got
weird.
to
Bible
Bible college.
college culture is weird. Period. All of it. There's not a single part of it that's not weird. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so but yeah, like we even had a professor like, why are you guys like taking so long? Like, why don't you just get married like next month? I was like,
Shut your
but
yapper.
for me, I was like trying to get through school. I wanted to graduate. I wanted to have like a year to plan the wedding. And like I guess part of it is like, I don't know, being born in the 90s, like I just wanted to have that very, I don't know, not traditional, but I wanted things to be planned out well. But I also had like my senior recital. In Bible college, they like to pile stuff up on you so you don't have time to do, because they want you contained, right? They want you
Mm,
to stay in that space. So you have chapel, you have all your schoolwork, you have to go be in a church outside of school, right? And then I had cross country, I was working in the school as well, and then all of my music stuff outside of the classes. So it was like I didn't really have time
hmm
to think about a lot of things, and so dating was really kind of on the sidelines with that as well. um and so it was like a lot to juggle. I didn't really have a lot to think about. And so I wanted to make sure that like it was like a good decision, because, we talk about, even my husband and I, like a lot of the couples that got married before us are not together now. And so we talk about how thankful we were that we had that time to get to know each other, and like how much we've grown through being like outside of the church, and talking to each other and being willing to have these conversations outside of that, because I think
hmm
that really helps. Because when you don't know someone
Oh,
and then
yeah.
you move in together and find out, you're like, oh, this is not what I thought it was.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I do know.
Um,
There have been
and
plenty
so
of people that's happened to, especially when you throw in like, okay, well, now we're married and God hates divorce. And so
uh,
you just feel stuck. Yeah.
right. And for me, I knew that like so the Bible, like a lot of people
hmm
said that like abuse and then adultery was like the only reasons to get
Yep.
divorced. But seeing what my mom went through with my stepdad, I was like, no, I
Yeah.
don't care. If I'm treated wrong, I'm leaving. So for me, divorce was always like, it was never like a bad word. Of course, it was never something that I wanted, but
Yeah.
it wasn't something that I was scared of. but I definitely wanted to make sure that I knew who I was getting into a relationship with, or at least had like a
Right.
decent idea of, because I didn't want to go through what my mom went through. And if I had kids, I didn't want to put them through what I went through,
Yeah. Yep.
you know, because
So,
we're all trying to do better. So,
oh, for sure, for sure. And that makes total sense. I mean, if your, upbringing was chaotic and abusive and stuff, yeah, I mean, that's the, like, I don't talk about our story very much, but like my mom, she was very much the same way, grew up in a very chaotic, very abusive home. And um, boy, the moment that she could leave, she did. And she did everything the exact opposite because it was the same. She said, I'm not going to be treated this way. My kids aren't going to go through this. And so, yeah, she, breaking those curses that
mhm.
generational curses. But so I'm
Yeah.
curious. So you all dated for 3 years, got engaged. You
And
said
then we took a
husband.
year engagement.
Okay, so a year-long engagement. At what point does does all this stuff that you've been pushing down, at what point does that start to come to the surface?
Okay, so actually not until after I had my third kid. So like, because that whole thing is like you're supposed to get married and have kids, right? So like that
Mhm.
was like the thing. Like we got married, and then I got pregnant like literally right after our honeymoon with my oldest. Um, so because like we got married, right like a few months after I graduated from college, and then after our honeymoon, I got pregnant with my oldest, and then like we moved, and then we had my daughter, and then we moved again, and I was like, I'm done having kids. Like, this is not what I thought it was going to be, because everyone, in the evangelical Christian like sphere makes like rearing, like child rearing, like this amazing, wonderful
Mhm.
thing. And because I had never seen anything different from that, I was like, oh, it's going to be this thing. But for me, I had the complete opposite experience.
Mhm.
That I love my kids and they are great and I love them and I wouldn't change it for the world. But like, if I went back, like, and I could tell myself, like, just wait, like, a
Mhm.
while before you have your
Yeah.
kids, because it is a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot, because I was 23 when I had my first. So super young, right? Like, that's really young. And even now when I tell people I have 3 kids and I'm 31 now, like, they're like,
Uh-huh.
but that's like, you go to Bible college,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that's the thing, right? Like no one talks to you about your age, right? They're
Yep.
like, oh, this is what you're supposed to do. But it was a lot, and I was like, I cannot handle any more kids, and seeing what my mom went through with 3 kids and like how crazy it was.
Mhm.
I was like, I don't want that for myself. And then surprise, the day I went in for an IUD, I found out I was pregnant with my third one. So I had him and I got my tubes tied.
There you go. Done.
I was like, done for good.
Though, it is
um,
it again, it's one of those shared experiences. You're not the first person I've talked to that came out of, like the very traditional, very conservative, some of them more high control. And it was a constant, like you said, they want you to stay in that bubble. So it's a constant activity. You're not able to think, you're not able to stop. They get married, they have kids, and then boom, stuff starts,
right.
yeah, you're not the first person. And again, it's one of those things. It feels like it's just inherent in a lot of the places that we grow up, that they produce that in you. Anyway, I don't want to hijack your story. Keep going.
Yeah. They do. And so after I had my third one, and I had my tubes tied and everything. I was like, all right, I'm like done having kids. I'm gonna start taking care of myself and like focusing on this, because my mental health was like all over the place. I started seeing like
Hmm.
a therapist, and I started to work on like losing all the weight that I had gained from having kids. I started exercising again, and I went back to a vegetarian lifestyle, which I had done all through college and everything. But as soon as I started having kids, like, I don't know, it changes. I don't know, your body just changes.
Yeah.
And so I went back to that, and um working through with my therapist, once I worked through a lot of like things I had to heal from my childhood, I had the space and the capacity to start thinking about those things that I had like kind of pushed down. And I was like, all right, now we're gonna start thinking about your sexuality. And I was like, I don't know about this, you know.
That's a big one.
Uh, yeah. I was like I don't know how to think about this because I'm married. Like, what is he gonna think?
Mm,
What is he gonna say? You know, how am I gonna talk to him about this? Because he only knows what he knows about me as far as how we met
hmm
in till now, right? Because I had never said anything about it previous to the fact. You know, there were points where he would be like, "Oh, would you still love me if I was like a girl? Like if I changed
hmm
into a girl?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, because you're still you." And he would always look at me kind of weird. And to me, I didn't realize that in a like Christian mindset, that was like
mm.
not the right answer.
It's yeah, that's true. It's not the right answer.
Right?
No, I wouldn't at all.
To me, it was like, you're still that person. I don't care. And then that's when I kind of had to have that conversation. And I was like, so I talked with my therapist. So I feel like that's always right. That's always part of like these weird conversations. Talked to my therapist. And he was like, I mean, and rightly so, kind of freaked out at first, right? Like
hmm
he was kind of like, whoa. But in the way of like, is she gonna leave me for like a
hmm
girl? Is she gonna leave me for you know, like this it definitely had like a little freak out moment. But then he was okay and he started asking me questions about everything and actually later admitted to me about these experiences he had when he was growing up, and he came out as bisexual. So I'm pan and he's bisexual. So it was definitely a very interesting thing for us and our relationship. And I think for him maybe it was a little easier because at this point he had become like agnostic. So like we were
hmm
out of like a church setting and he admitted like, I know that there's something there, but I don't know if it's like
Right.
the God that I like grew up hearing about in the church. And for him, his grandfather was a pastor, and so was his grandmother, and like his whole family is always involved in the church, and so he never really had the opportunity to think about these things himself. And so we
That makes
both
sense.
kind of have grown through this and think through the like these things together. And it was definitely like, not that it was rocky, but we definitely had to like work through it, right? Like we had to kind of navigate learning about everything together and going through different situations. Um
So it was through, just quick question. So it was through your journey that then your husband was like, well, okay. And then I don't know, but I guess we could, I'm looking at it like almost kind of gave him permission to say, wait, okay, I'm dealing with things too, but I didn't know how to talk about it, or is that kind of how it kind of played out a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. Because even when he kind of announced it to everyone, he was like, you know, seeing my wife go through these things and her like bravery and being able to talk about it has given me um like the like courage to kind of
hmm
talk about this and to admit this not only to myself but to everyone else, you know. So that's kind of for him how everything happened.
Right.
He's like, seeing her go through this kind of inspired me to be able to talk about that. And
hmm
I mean, there's a lot of things that he went through that he hadn't talked about before that like he opened up about with
hmm
me at that point.
Yeah, I'm just guessing, from the outside looking in, that that's just a level of vulnerability that a lot of people don't experience because to do that takes, I mean, my gosh, you do. It's like I mean, especially growing up in the church, right? Bible college, it's literally like, and I'm saying this in air quotes for people that can't see this, but that's like the darkest corners of your heart. You know what I mean?
Right.
In the church world, and
Mhm.
to be able to open that up to light, to one another. I mean. and to walk through it together. So what's marriage like now on the other side of that?
It's interesting because we're still learning a lot about
Hmm.
each other in this, and we have a lot like I don't know, we're exploring like a lot of different things and talking still about different things, but I would say that it definitely brought us like closer, like we feel more open with it.
Hmm.
I think it definitely opened up a lot. Like whatever was kind of like closed off before definitely just unlocked, and
Hmm.
it's like totally like out there, you know. And even because previously I felt like with everyone, even him, could not talk about my emotions. Like
Hmm.
did not want anyone to know what I was feeling or thinking. And that was like a huge thing for me to get over.
Hmm.
Like I just absolutely it could not talk about what I was feeling to other people. It was so hard for me to articulate. And now I feel like it's so much easier because
Hmm.
of that. Like I'm not I'm scared of
Yeah.
talking about what I'm feeling, you know?
Well, it just kind of seems, if you both can say those things to each other, can admit those things to each other, and then continue to walk together through them, it's like, well, there's nothing I'm going to feel that he's not going to hear. I mean,
Hmm.
that it just seems to me like that just creates a level of trust that a lot of people just don't have.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean like we have I mean and it's not always easy, definitely. There's still
Hmm.
certain points where we, you know, you have your things, but that's human, you know, and part of what you us healing from different things from our past, you know,
Hmm.
and with each other before that. So it's not always easy, but it's definitely makes it easier to talk about those things
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. And I'm curious too. You talked about your spirituality has changed and his as well. I'm wondering
Mhm.
how being able to talk through this, admit this to yourself, to others, and this ongoing learning and exploring and stuff, how has that informed the spiritual side of things? I mean, obviously it's changed it, but how has it informed it, enriched it? What does that look like?
Um, I think it's like for me, it's definitely complicated a lot of my relationships with people in the church
Hmm.
because, like I said, the God that I learned about was always this God of love. And like, I know that like there are parts that were like, oh, God has his wrath. And I'm like, yeah, like he does. But like, if he says these things, it's like, you know, if you know love, then you know God, and to know God is to know love. Then, like, if all of these things are centered around it, and even like the fruits of the spirit are all things that have to do with being kind and gentle and
Hmm.
treating other people decently, being a decent human, basically. Um, all these people that I see in the church are not doing that. And so, and that's just a generalization. Obviously it's not everyone, but you know it's a lot, it's a majority.
Hmm.
And so I it's complicated because while I still believe in God, I don't necessarily it has made me definitely question a lot of things and research more into things because I went to Bible college. I do know theology well, I do know the
Hmm.
Bible well, I know historical context well, you know, like I didn't just go through it to go through it. I didn't just memorize things to memorize things. Like I went there to learn and
Hmm.
to get all these things um into my life to know them. And so I know those things, but those things existing doesn't mean that other things don't exist.
Hmm.
Two things can be true at the same time. And so that's really what I'm finding. And so I'm trying to find do I fit into this thing where I want to have this relationship with God,
Hmm.
or do I want to continue on this spiritual path of just following what feels right and flows right? And sometimes that feels like, you know, yeah, listening to worship music and going to church, and sometimes that feels like this and not necessarily having like a set path. So it's definitely still like trying to
Hmm.
figure out where I am on that because
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm learning.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I've learned in recent years is yes and.
Hmm.
Not either or. A lot of times, most of the time it's yes and. And that has been really freeing to me, to be able to say that and to admit that out loud of like, yes, and this too, you know.
Yeah.
So I feel a lot of what you're talking about of like, and you know, and one of the things that I found too is that a lot of the things that we're talking about or experiencing or doing as far as practices, they're not new. They're ancient. They're things that have been
Right.
done and were hidden from us in the conservative, you know, church, that
Yeah.
they were deemed as heretical at one point, but yet they were practiced for hundreds of years. And
Right.
and if you want to stay in church history, some branches of that Christian church have never stopped practicing some of those things. And it's just
Oh
like,
yeah.
well,
I had a conversation the other day. I was like, "Oh, Catholics are basically witches," and everyone was like, "What?" I was like, "Just let go with me here." And I went, I went off on a rant, and I went on this
uh,
thing.
you're not wrong. I mean, if you think about some of the stuff that we talk about in church, all you got to do is change like a word, and it's like, oh,
Right?
they're talking about casting spells. No, we're not.
Yeah.
No, we're not. Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. It's the same thing. I mean,
Right. And it's
it's
like
not the same thing, but I mean, it's literally,
the same thing, right?
yeah.
It's like these like in Italy is where the tarot cards started, and it was actually just a card game for the people who knew how to read in the church to play together. It was
Mhm.
never like a actual like divination thing. And in the Bible, God only actually goes against one divination thing, and it's because you could literally choke on a bone and die. Like he was literally like, I'm saying not to do it because you could die because it's a dumb way to do things. Like
Yeah.
it's just all these different things that I'm learning. I'm like, so and then also like you see these parts where it's like, don't have any other gods before me and this and that, and then never he never says no, there aren't any other gods. He just says like, don't have any others before me, and it's like he's not denying that they're not there, right? Like he's not denying that these things don't exist. And so I'm like, if you want to use the Bible as your thing, you need to look at all of this and not just like these small sections of it, and look at the history too. But yeah, as a regular churchgoer, I guess you don't really want to go into it that deep all the time, but
No.
it's important, especially if it's your faith and you want to make your faith a part of your life, you know.
Well, you and
Oh,
I both know, you and I both know a lot of the same people, and that conversation is not going to happen with a lot of the same people because what you're saying, and you know, even it, and it, you know, throw the sexuality into it as well, but um, not to be a Debbie Downer, but you know, there there's lots of people, not just the ones, you know, that we know, but lots of people, like you
mhm,
said, most would just see that as like, well, you've just abandoned the real Jesus. You've abandoned the church.
right,
And um, you know, and when that's, you know, that's just not the case. Uh, I would say that we've abandoned your version 100%.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
your version of, you know, your understanding or interpretation. Yeah, bye. But yeah.
And I would say coming outside of that version of the church has given me a greater appreciation for life and understanding. It has made me like a much more kind person, not only to myself but to the people around me, a better mom to my kids, like a better wife, like it just, and even like caring for the earth and the way that I do things. In general, it has made me better and more conscious of everything around me because I'm
Well,
not just in this like bubble, you know?
yeah, and then even your ability to lean into who you are, your whole self, right? Not
Mhm.
sectioning off, not oppressing, not pushing aside, but being able to accept your whole self, and then what that does in turn, you know, for you emotionally and physically and spiritually as well, where coming where we came from, that's not an option. It's literally not an option. It's literally taught you can't do that. That's sinful.
Hmm. Yeah. And so that's definitely where I'm at right now. And we moved. We had a big move from Georgia back to Florida.
Yeah.
And we're currently living back with my mom until we can afford to buy a home, which hopefully the market is better in like 3 years. That would be great.
We'll
um
see. A lot of it depends on those jack wagons in Tallahassee. We'll see what they do. But anyway, that's
so,
a different story. That's a different podcast.
yeah. um and so I'm definitely like having to also um figure out things in a different way, because now that we are living with other people who do have other beliefs as well,
Hmm.
um although I would say that my mother and our relationship has gotten a lot better, and my mom has changed quite a bit. She's a lot more open than she used to be. There's still some things I think that
Hmm.
make her uncomfortable, and so I try to keep it
Yeah, just
within the
being
depths of our bedroom.
yeah, just being respectful.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely a little bit um it's definitely a little more complicated trying to do all these things, because I'm learning a lot about my ancestry, um, because my ancestry is Norse, and so leaning into a lot of practices from Norse practices before the Christianization of Germany, Iceland, and like just the Scandinavian areas, because I'm learning about that and seeing like how much more connected they were to themselves, and even sexuality, like for them it was not this evil thing, right? Like they were
Hmm.
like, oh, whatever. I mean, they definitely had their like gender roles set out, but there were definitely stances where that happened, but it wasn't like this a big deal. And so just learning in all these other cultures, it's been like a thing that has just happened and been accepted, or like just happened and no one really like pushed against it like they
Hmm.
did until the Christianization of that area. um Even the concept of the devil wasn't introduced in a lot of areas until the Christianization of that area. So I'm having to learn a lot of that too by myself, because the situation that we're
Yeah.
in.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's been interesting and good, I think.
Yeah. That's yeah, you can't make somebody learn something they're not ready for, especially if it's talking about like faith and spirituality. Untangling some of those things are really difficult, and if you try to push somebody too fast, it's never good. But that's awesome that you all have that space to continue to do that though. And hopefully that helps your mom and some of her healing and moving forward as well, saying um how much healthier you are and then your relationships are because of what you've been able to do in the years since.
And I would say even it's helped me even with like expressing myself outwardly.
Hmm.
My friend recently did my hair, and she gave me bangs. So I have curly, super super curly hair, and that's always like hard to deal with. Like it is like everyone always wants curly hair, but they have no idea how hard it is to take care of. And I've always been like just throwing it up or straightening it. It's always been like my thing. But the whole thing is like you're as a girl, a cis white girl, whatever, you're supposed to have straight long hair, or you're supposed to have really beautiful long hair, right? Like you're never supposed to have anything that strays from that. And so coming out kind of gave me this, I don't know, ability to kind of play with it. And she cut it recently, and just I feel so much more at home in myself being able to
Mm.
do that too. And so I feel more able to express like the days that I do feel more masculine and the days that I do feel more feminine. It feels great. And seeing that My husband's always like, "Oh, you did good." Either way, like even
Hmm.
when I dress more masculine, he still is like very like attracted to me. Like that's great, and like to me, I feel like um it shows that not
Hmm.
everyone just sees that you have to be a certain way, you know, to have relationships.
And and you said something that kind of like set off a light bulb in my head. You were talking about this ability to kind of express yourself a little bit more. I saw a post that I don't know if it was yesterday or today, but
Mhm.
speaking of creativity, um, you started your own little company with they're like miniature, are they soaps? I'm trying to remember what I
So
saw.
yeah, there's soaps and candles and different things. So I always have seen like, so I call it for like the beige aesthetic, the minimalistic, the
Uh-huh.
very like contemporary lifestyle, all these products for your home that are environmentally friendly, zero waste friendly, but very rarely, even on Etsy, because I
Mm,
went on Etsy to look. I was like, maybe I'm just not looking in the right place. So I went on Etsy to look. And still, even there, I didn't see very many towards gamers and nerds
hmm
and that lifestyle, you know, because my husband and I we're very nerdy, we're very game like we love games and all that stuff. And I was like, you know what? I want to create something for them. Like I feel like they should be able to have that lifestyle and not feel guilty about it.
hmm
And so I have been creating soaps and lotions and candles and candle wax melts that go towards the nerds and the gamers that are environmentally friendly, that are zero waste. Everything that I'm package is going to be either reusable or biodegradable, so that they can continue with their lifestyle, but in a way that they don't have to feel guilty about what they're doing to the planet or and even to their own bodies.
hmm
Because beeswax is good for your home, it clears out the air, and it's good for your body too. So I
That's
wanted
awesome.
to do that,
So
and so
what's that called?
So it's right now it's Sunshine Eyes. The website's not completely finished yet. We're gonna have it up soon. But it's actually there's so it's three shops in one. So there's my part of the shop, and then my mom's husband sells a whole bunch of plants and stuff that he grows in his garden too.
Mm.
It's all grown here in Florida. And then my mom does crafts. We grew up, she sewed all of our clothes. She made our Mickey ears when we went to Disney.
Mm.
And people were like asking if they could buy hers from her because they couldn't see it in a shop, and it's because she made them.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
she's making her own stuff to sell in there. So it's three shops in one. And then so you'll see my things in there. But the website is overall on my thing called Sunshine Eyes, and it has like a little mason jar with a sunflower in it. I should
Oh,
see
that's
it.
cool. That's cool.
And I'll have
What
a post when it like officially goes up.
so hopefully by the time hopefully um that will happen before this comes out and even if it doesn't we'll make sure that's in the show notes, like a link to that.
Yeah,
And even if this comes out before that, we can just
cool.
put it back in there, if somebody hears it later. Um, but
Yeah.
I think that's really cool that um because of all of these things that have happened like internally that you've been able to process and you and your husband together and then being freed to then be expressive in who you are has kind of blossomed into this really tangible like cool thing that people can be like, hey, I want to do that too. And, can be like, because there are people that listen and they want to support, like small businesses, but also queer centric businesses. And so we'll make sure that that's all in there so that people can, if people want to be a part of that they can.
Thank you. Yeah, it definitely it helps a lot of with creative people. There is something that I read that if the creative person doesn't create um constantly, they just like their inspiration just stops. Like they just it just disappears. And I think
Mm,
that's true. Because for a long time when I was going through that period of like just being a mom and just trying to follow the evangelical Christian lifestyle, I didn't touch my guitar. I didn't touch any creative anything. And it felt like my creativity just sort of left, like it
Hmm.
put itself in a box and was like, all right, if you're not going to do anything with me, I'm just going to leave. And I
Yeah.
literally felt like I couldn't do anything. Like I couldn't pick up like a pen and write or anything. And then as soon as I started dealing with all these things, it was like, oh, I wrote a whole book and I'm trying to get published now. And now I'm finally working on all of those things for that website and doing all these creative things again. And it really, you don't realize how much it takes a toll on your whole life when you are not able to be who you are,
Hmm.
you know.
Well, let me ask you this, just because I want to honor your time. I know you're in your kid's room right now, trying to situate stuff with your big move and everything. So where are you finding inspiration? Where are you finding joy now that you guys are, on this path towards healing and wholeness and stuff? Where are you drawing that from?
Um, so different things. I actually there was a so this podcast is one of them, just listening to everyone's stories. And then another podcast, it's called House of Herbie by Queen Herbie. She's an artist, and she talks about that. She talks about finding your purpose and finding like your creativity. It's for people who want to be creative. They want to find their outlet, but they're intelligent. They talk about all kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
um, just to broaden your horizons on what you think about different subjects like hallucinogenics and what you can do for art and how you find that and how you find your purpose. And it's a really really good one, and it's actually um one that like kind of catapulted me towards like finishing like writing my book
Mm,
and starting my business and everything. And so
that's awesome.
it's definitely a good one. So that one, and then just um I think like in little things, seeing that like people are so passionate about um being kind and being good, um with everything with Palestine, and then all of the laws with women's bodies and things like that, seeing that people care, I
Mm,
think definitely gives me hope and inspiration, that because you see that it's so easy to be like, oh, people suck, like there's you doom
hmm.
scroll all day long, right? But then you see all these people who are fighting against it, who are putting out hope, who are saying these things, and there are so many people, but because media, um because that other voice is so loud, it's so hard to see them sometimes.
Hmm.
But when you do see them, it's great. It's there's only darkness because light exists, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love that idea too, because I, we're recording this on was it January 17th, and an episode came out today, and the person that was talking talked about it's easy to rage scroll, to just focus on the rage and not find the joy. And it's literally what you just said, is you're finding joy in those things. And I think that's really good advice, especially for the season that we're in.
mhm,
And I think for the year that I think that we're in for,
right.
um, I think it's going to be really important that, yes, I think, you were talking about those big things, it is loud. And I think that there are moments where we should be angry, right? And it's like holy
Mhm,
rage, divine rage. But you can't exist in that 24/7. You just
right,
can't. And like
right.
you said, I think it's really important that we find those little those little places of joy, what, big, small, but really, really look for them. I think that's a really good advice.
Mhm, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Monica, I'm gonna honor your time. I know you've got there's kids, for those that can't see this, there's like kids clothes behind you, and you're folded and doing stuff and all these things, being a good mom. Just thank you for taking time out of your morning and jumping on here with us and walking us through your story. I know that there are going to be people that listen to it that are going to resonate with it. There are going to be parts they're just like, that's exactly, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. So, and every time somebody does that, just like you said, every time somebody does that, it's just like one of those little glimmers of hope and connection. And so, thank you for coming on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Listen, check the show notes. Monica, I almost didn't ask you if somebody listens to this and they're like, yeah, I want to talk to her, or I want to know more. Are you open for somebody reaching out? And if so, how do they find you?
Yeah, they can. I'm on Instagram. You can find me under my name, Monica Chadwick, or Sunshine Eyes.
Oh,
That's on there too. Or I'm on TikTok. So
is it the same on TikTok?
I think on TikTok it's just my name, it's Monica Chadwick. It's just
Do we follow
my
each other
name.
on TikTok?
I think so.
I think so. I
I
think so.
follow you. I don't know.
I'm gonna
Maybe.
check. I'm gonna check. I thought we did, but I'm like, wait a second. I don't know. I'm on TikTok, but I'm not like on TikTok. But anyway,
Right. Yeah.
um, but that'll be in the show notes. I'll make sure it's in the show notes. So if you're listening to this and you're wanting to get in contact with Monica, you can find her in the show notes, and hopefully that website will be up, and we'll link that in there too for your for your store. Um, Thanks for listening, everybody. If you've got a story that you'd like to share, hit me up and we'll schedule that. Thank you again, Monica, for taking time out of your day and just being so open and honest with us. I know it's going to uplift people. So thank you again so much.
Thanks. I hope so.
Yes, it will be. No hope. It will. I promise. Thanks for following along, everybody. We hope that you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. Now get out of here. Go love on some people.